Welcome back to UNESCAP workshop on Trade Agreement Text Analysis tool. My name is Maria Simenova. I hope that the introduction video has spiked your interest in understanding the workings of the tool. So without further delay, let's dive into it. On the slide, you can see the schematic outlining the structure of the online tool, but let's look at it a bit closer. As you can see, the tool consists of three major modules. In the first module, you can select trade agreements that you would like to analyze. To do that, you can use the provided filters that allow you to select trade agreements by the dates of their signing or their going into force, or by the period within which those trade agreements were valid and implemented. The second filter allows you to additionally select trade agreements by the parties that are signatories to your treaties of interest. Having done that, you can move forward to the second module where you can select from the three customizable mapping options. On this schematic, you can see what sort of customization can be done. Later in this course, we will examine each option in detail. Having selected and customized your mapping option, you launch the mapping algorithm that will go through all of the articles of selected trade agreements, and then it will take you to the third module. Here you will be able to review the mapping results and then download those mapping results or the summary datasets to your computer. Again, later in this course, we will examine the structure of the datasets generated after the mapping. But now let's go to the actual online tool and run the simple mapping query to get a rough understanding of how it works.
So this is the trade agreement text analysis tool, and specifically this is the front page where you can read a bit about what the tool does, how it can be used, and about the methodology and algorithm on which the tool is built. And in this link over here, you can download the technical paper that I already mentioned a few times. Now let's go to the first module of our tool. This is here that you can select trade agreements that you want to analyze. At the time of recording this video, there were 445 trade agreements in our database. But of course, you don't have to analyze all of them. You can select only those trade agreements that you want to analyze. And we can select trade agreements by using these two filters over here, and you can press on these question marks to read information about each of those filters and what they help you achieve. So let's now select our time period 2005 through 2008, and let's select our economy, Turkey. So looking at the first filter, you can see that there are three options that you can select from. And the first option lets you select treaties that were signed in any year between 2005 and 2008. And here we can see that there are 5 trade agreements that were signed by Turkey in this time period. If you choose this option, you will then select trade agreements that went into force in any year between 2005 through 2008. And if you look over here, there are 7 trade agreements to which Turkey is a party that went into force within this time period. And if you select this option, you are selecting those trade agreements that were implemented within any of those years in this time period. For example, here you can see that there are 16 trade agreements signed by Turkey that went into force before 2008, and at the point of 2008 all of those trade agreements were still implemented. So these are the three options for selecting trade agreement using the first filter. And in the second filter, we can enter the economies that are parties to trade agreements. Right now we have Turkey selected, but we can add more by typing names of those economies. For example, let's add Thailand and France. And we will see that there are 51 trade agreements signed by these three economies that were valid and implemented within this time period. At UNESCAP, we are a bit Asia Pacific centered, so we also have the option to select all of the Asia Pacific economies in one go. So if we set our filters like so, we see that there are 36 trade agreements that were signed by various Asia Pacific economies within the time period between 2005 and 2008. To this selection, we can add other economies that are not part of the Asia Pacific region. And if we do that, we will see that we added a few trade agreements to our selection. However, if we have already selected Asia Pacific and then typed the name of another economy that is part of that same of that region, you will see that the number of selected trade agreements would not change because China is already accounted for by selecting Asia Pacific here. There is one cool feature on this page that doesn't affect selection of the trade agreements. If you go over here, you would be able to review texts of the articles of the selected trade agreements. You can read through them or you can search through them. For example, let's type climate change. So there is one article in one of the trade agreements that mentioned climate change. You can type environment. And again, we see those articles that contain this word. And we can review the text to understand the context in which these particular words are used. This can be helpful in formulating the initial set of keyword combinations that you want to use in your analysis. But anyhow, whatever you do here doesn't affect the selection of the trade agreements that you want to analyze. So now that we cleared that, let's do our first mapping query. To do that, let's select the time period of 2015 through to 2020, and let's select Chile over here. So we have selected 4 trade agreements that we want to analyze. And now we go to the next module where we can select between different mapping options. In the next modules, we will go into a lot of detail to understand what each of those mapping options does. Today, we will work with the one category mapping. That's the simple mapping option. And we will only use these 2 fields. This field is used to enter keyword combinations that we would like to search for in our article texts. And here we enter a label for the topic that we want to map. For example, consider a situation where you want to map all those articles that contain a reference to something that's relevant to climate change. And here is our set of keyword combinations. As you can see, you can enter as many keyword combinations as you want in this field. They have to be separated from each other with a semicolon. So now we are ready to run our mapping. So we press the button run, and our algorithm goes through over 1,000 articles in these 4 trade agreements. And once the mapping is done, we are taken to the 3rd module where we can review results of the mapping. And the first review option is to only see those articles that were found to contain keyword combinations that we provided. So we can see that there are 3 articles in those 4 trade agreements that contain at least one of the keyword combinations that we provided. This table provides us with the titles of the trade agreements that were found to contain relevant keyword combinations, with the text of the articles, as well as article number, article name, and chapter number, chapter name associated with the relevant article texts. Here we have our labels that we provided for the topic that we wanted to map. And this column contains sections of text from the articles that matched our keyword combinations. And you can see that some of the articles contain quite a few matches to the keyword combinations that we provided. To better understand the context in which each of those keyword combinations were used, we can again copy those into the search fields, and these keyword combinations will be highlighted within the text of the relevant articles. So it's very convenient to review the mapping results this way. Another option to review the mapping results is to only look at those articles that were found not to contain any references to the keyword combinations that we provided. For example, if we type climate change here, we will see that there are no matches. Alternatively, if necessary, we can see all articles in one table. So here we have articles that were not found to have any matches to any of the keywords that we provided, as well as those that were flagged positively by the algorithm. And if we go over here, we can actually download the mapping results as a CSV file onto our computer. So these are our mapping results. Let's zoom in on them. So what we have here is all of the articles from each of the selected trade agreements, as well as relevant information about chapters and articles that contain the article text. And over here, we can see the column with the labels. So we can use this to only select those articles that were found to contain references to the topic that we are interested in. And here we have 2 columns. The first one you already recognize from what I mentioned earlier. These are the sections of the article text that matched our keyword combinations, while this column contains the keyword combinations that produced matches in the article text. And although here these look very similar or the same, in the next module, when we will start using the flexibility patterns, there will be a significant difference between these 2 columns. Another section of this downloadable dataset contains various metadata associated with each of the analyzed trade agreements. At the moment, all you need to know is just this metadata is here, but a bit later in today's lecture, we will examine closer what this metadata is. So we ran our first mapping query. First, we used these two filters to select trade agreement that we wanted to analyze. Then we selected the mapping option that suited our needs today, which is a one category mapping option. We provided the keyword combinations and the label for the topic that is coded with these keyword combinations. We ran our query and we were taken to the results, which we could review and download onto our computer. So now, before we conclude our Module 1 lecture, we still have two important things to review. The first question is what is exactly analyzed when we run the query, and the second one is where the data on each trade agreement comes from. So let's start with the second question. The trade agreement data that is used in our text analysis tool is drawn from our XML database of trade agreements. XML stands for Extensible Markup Language, and it's a format that uses tags to mark up the content of the file and its structure. This format allows for storing both the data and metadata in a consistent format that can be easily parsed by different programming languages, including R. In our case, one XML file contains text and metadata of only one trade agreement. On the slide, you can see the structure of a XML file in our database. As you can see, it has two major blocks. One is called meta. This is the beginning of this block, and this is the end. And another one is body. This is where it begins, and it ends at the very bottom of the XML file. The meta section contains all of the metadata about trade agreements, and here you can see what this metadata is. It contains a name of a trade agreement, whether it is in force. You can see the dates when it was signed, went into force, when it was notified to the WTO. You can also see the list of the parties that are signatory to the trade agreements, as well as the dates when those parties acceded to a given trade agreement or withdrew from it. There are a few other metadata here. The full list of what is contained in meta section of the XML file can be found in the technical paper in Annex 1. Then the body section of the XML file contains the text of the trade agreement, which is split into articles. Each article is surrounded by opening and closing article tags, and the opening tag contains some of the attributes describing article name and article number. Then articles are organized into groups between the opening and closing tags of the corresponding chapters, and opening chapter tags contain attributes describing chapter name and chapter number. We currently have XML files with text and data of over 440 trade agreements, and when we parse this data into R, we essentially get two data frames, one with metadata and another one with texts of the articles. And another question that we raised is what is actually analyzed when we run the mapping query. What is analyzed is a combination of article title and article text. But we don't take those article text specifically the way they are contained in the XML files, because for some of the text, there are a lot of unwanted elements that are present in the XML files, as those texts were copy-pasted from other files or websites. So there are sometimes new line or horizontal tabulation tags. So we want to remove those things And essentially what the tool does, it preprocesses article text to remove any of the unwanted elements. And here you can see the short description of what those elements are. One thing that gets removed is all of the punctuation marks and symbols except semicolons, full stops, and dashes. We keep semicolons and full stops because they usually delimit the complete statements within the articles, and dashes are often parts of different words. For example, there could be a phrase environment related where environment and related would be separated by a dash, or for example there would be the word cross border where cross and border would have a dash in between them, so we retain that as that is a part of the word. So basically when we run the mapping algorithm, it searches for the keyword combinations in the processed texts of article title and article text.
On this next slide, you can see what the original text and the processed text may look like. As you can see, original text retains all of the punctuation marks and various symbols, while the processed text only retains the dashes, semicolons, and full stops.
So this concludes our lecture for Module 1. You learned the basic modules of the tool and what they do. We ran the trial query to see what the tool does. We also looked at the data that feeds into the tool.
After you listen to the video lecture, please play with the tool and then attempt quiz 1. If you run into any issues with using the tool, you can send me your questions through the website where the training materials are posted. Thank you for your attention and good luck.